This is the reality part of the West, looking at the daily life of the cowboy. Whether handling big boys like this Texas Longhorn, known for skittish and unpredictable behavior, or rescuing a little one at night in stormy weather, or the cowboy handling the chuck wagon on a cattle drive. A major contributor to the ongoing activity in the mid-19th century and early 20th century was cattle, and especially the need to move cattle from where they're raised to population centers. This took the cattle drive. In America, the population grew from 1800 to 1900 from 5 million to close to 75 million people, and with it the need for food, which triggered cattle drives from Texas across open rangeland through portions of Kansas, Nebraska, Dakotas, Montana, and Wyoming. During this period, an estimated 27 million head of cattle moved across the country. A typical drive consisted of 3,000 head, 10 to 12 cowboys, a well-respected cook and chuck wagon, and 3 horses for each of the riders, and a wrangler who watched the spare horses. A well-managed herd would do about 15 miles a day. Branding facilitated the identification of ownership, particularly at the railheads, and to a degree discouraged rustlers. The equipment needed was first a good fire, branding iron, ear notchers to identify male versus female. The ground crew performed the branding while the mounted cowboys rounded up the cattle. Over time, cattle trails developed with names like Chisholm, Bozeman, Cimarron, etc. Along the trail, there were numerous saloons and poker tables. Often, the cowhands would gamble their pay while still on the drives. However, for the lucky few who left the table with winnings, there were still more alternative forms of entertainment. All this was going on while the cattle rested and were fed. These accommodating locations along the cattle drive trails were called cowtowns. Many novels and films have been centered around the cattle drive, like Red River with John Wayne, and the long-running series Rawhide with Clint Eastwood. The fact remains, cattle drives were a major livelihood for many cowboys. This, however, is what they feared: a sudden stampede. Harry Jackson's masterpiece, Stampede, is a 5-foot-long sculpture of 30 rampaging longhorns, depicting the young cowboy who has fallen from his horse, foot caught in his stirrup, being dragged to death. Jackson chose to sculpt a separate piece depicting the lead rider desperately trying to turn back the herd and ultimately bring it to a stop. This piece is entitled Hazen the Herd. The same year, Jackson sculpted The Inevitable and Too Often Outcome, entitled Plantin', which depicts the dead cowboy's open-range burial in an unmarked grave. Nothing like these 2 works had ever been done before. Only 7 castings of each piece were released, most in museums today. Jackson's Plantin' has been described as a silent tableau of cowboy grief. Plantin' consists of 8 figures, 4 horses, and an inquisitive dog in the foreground. Jackson selected certain figures in this piece to cast individually in larger size and greater detail. This polychrome image of a figure, head bowed, hat in hand, is paying his respects to his fallen companion and is entitled Where the Road Forks. From Plantin' came a second figure, Cowboy Meditation. At a glance, it's a simple figure on a horse. There is much more to it. There is no bravado or cowboy posturing. Jackson has presented another figure witnessing the burial of a comrade. Horse and rider are completely still. Both heads are bowed. The cowboy's hat is in his hand. he's paying silent respects to a fallen comrade. Jackson said of these figures, "They are real men, full of real pride, yet can doff their hats in the presence of a dead companion without worrying about the impression they're making on others." 2 lines from a simple cowboy ballad express the dignity and shared humanity of the young cowboy's death. "Bill, you take my saddle. Slim, you take my gun. And Shorty, take my lariat rope when my last ride is done." Generally, daily life is more reality and less myth. Episode 14 looks at the daily life of the working cowboy. It's hard work, low pay, and questionable sanitation in the bunkhouse.